Pay a covered transaction based upon documented information that is verified by the creditor using reasonably reliable third-party evidence. That's, in a nutshell, what the ability to repay rule is. And it doesn't sound that bad. The way the ability to repay rule works is when you walk into your mortgage company, whether it's a mortgage broker or a direct lender, doesn't matter who it is, they have to abide by this if it's a covered transaction. I think that's the next slide. So if it's a covered transaction, they have to do that. So the ATR rule applies to all closed-end consumer credit transactions secured by a dwelling. Now this is how I would put it, including the realty to which the dwelling is attached. Now the CFPB, because they know what they're doing, they say that it's a closed-end transaction secured by a dwelling and the realty that's attached to that dwelling, because they evidently know how this stuff works, and they realize real estate's attached to houses, not houses being attached to real estate. So that tells you how well written this rule is. And it's ludicrous they've done. So a closed-end transaction. So what does that mean? Can anybody read that and tell me? What isn't included?
Land.
Land isn't, but what kind of loan isn't included? What kind of line of credit? Who's that? She's right. So, a home equity line of credit that's open-ended. How many of you are going to write one of those when you sell a house? And the guy who doesn't know what the CFPB is doesn't get it. So, basically, about every loan you're going to write is included. Just go to the next slide. So HELOCs are going to be not included. So they're going to use 8 determining factors. So when you go in to see Wells Fargo, Home Funding Corp, all these lenders, they have to, at a bare minimum, if they're going to write you a loan, look at these 8 things. Their reasonably expected income or their current assets. So if your client wants to buy a house and your client has a job, and the loan officer is going to use that job to qualify them for the loan, then that's what they have to look at, is the reasonably expected income. If your client is retired, it's going to use the assets. In other words, they're getting income off their assets, then the assets are what the loan officer has to look at. But now that they're going to, if they're going to use their employment, then number 2, they have to verify that employment. So now you've got to verify their income. Now these kind of sound like something you're used to, right? Here's where, now they also have to look at the fully amortized payment for their covered transaction. Anybody want to guess what fully amortized means under the rule? Let's say, for instance, a neg am loan, which, by the way, you can write under it. You can write it, right? But if you write it, you have to make sure that they can pay this loan back by using the fully amortized payment for the covered transaction, which means after it's recast, which is their word, meaning after it resets, what's the highest payment after reset that we're going to see under this loan? And can they, with this current income, make the payment? So, if you are used to getting, like the old 3-in-1 arms, the initial payment is $555, but after it resets, the payment's going to be $1,800. That's now the payment they're going to use to qualify them for the loan, is the $1,800 payment, not the $500 one. So almost like it's out the window. Okay? If you're getting a second loan at the same time, that also has to be included. And then we have to use their payments on all their other obligations that are related to the mortgage. We'll get to this a little bit later. So if you're requiring them to do an escrow account, an impound account, you're going to have to include that. All their other revolving account, that we're used to. Monthly DTI, we're probably used to, especially if you're doing any kind of government backload. And then credit history. I think it's interesting. Just clear down the bottom, because that's usually one of the top things that your lender's going to look at. So these are the underwriting factors they have to look at to write a loan under federal law. Okay? Let's go to the next slide. So now they have to verify it. The verification hasn't really changed much, other than self-employed. Raise your hand if you have a client self-employed. Keep the hand up if you know your client has a CPA. Because if your client doesn't have a CPA, you might as well find a reason. Because your client's going to try to use a bank statement to prove their income. My guess is you're going to be hard pressed to find a bank who will accept it. They're going to want a profit and loss, and it's going to have to be verified by a CPA. Now, they'll take the bank statement, but if they're going to try to use the bank statement to show the income, they're probably going to try to use the business bank statement. And my guess is no one's going to be able to read it because there's going to be 30,000 transactions in there. And so you're going to need a CPA to review and sign on the bottom line of that profit and loss. And how many CPAs are going to do that if they're not the accountant for your plan? They'll do it, but they're going to want $8 grand. And so they're not going to do it because no one's going to pay that. Okay? So self-employed are getting hit real hard. And it's going to be under every aspect of this new law. So everything else is very close to the same except for self-employed to get hit hard. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. So we already talked about this. See what a creditor covered transaction. Yeah, so they're going to, if it's any loan that resets in any way, so adjustable rate mortgages, neg-ams, balloons, any of that, they're going to have to basically use the highest payment. Okay, let's go to the next one. Now we'll get to the exception. There's one exception to this rule, this ability to repay, and that's if your lender writes a qualified mortgage. And what a qualified mortgage does is it says, if you write one of these, we'll assume they have the ability to repay. And so if they meet this, so the qualified mortgage, it's an exception to the rule, and it provides the lender for the safe harbor. Who knows what a safe harbor is? Right? Okay, so that's, when I read the rule, I thought, oh, a safe harbor. Now, I didn't really introduce myself. I thought this was a good place to do it. I'm a real estate attorney. Okay? I worked for for the first several years of my practice, my biggest clients were Bank of America, Chase, and Wells Fargo. And Wells Fargo, Chase, they hired me because they bought Wachovia and all these great, yeah. So my job for the first several years was to take, in Las Vegas, I probably foreclosed on, I don't know, it's over 2,000 homes. And so I have seen how many of these loans, and the stated income loans and the negative amortization. My favorite is the pick a pay. It's my absolute favorite loan, right? And I have seen what happens on the back end. You get to see what happens on the front end. I see how your clients act on the back end when they miss a payment or two. And they claim you and them coerce them into this, right? And they try to convince me that my client's the bad guy, and that they are the poor little innocent victims. Let's go to the next one. So what are they safe from? What's this safe harbor? Here's where it gets. So this is the important part for you to understand, because your life, when it comes to dealing with your lender, is about to get complicated. And I think if you understand why, it might help you. So in addition to, does everybody understand what TILA is? Truth in lending? Okay. Somewhat onerous. You're going to run into loan originators who either understand it or they don't. And those who don't, if they haven't taken the time to learn it, they probably never will. Those who do, they get it. So a consumer may recover all finance charges and fees paid on the transaction unless it can be established that the failure to comply was not material for 3 years. The first 3 years after the loan, there's a statute of limitations. So if in the first 3 years they default on the loan, I can guarantee they're going to sue the lender. I can all guarantee it. And I have faced those people, and I know what they're going to say. You and them coerce them into taking this loan, and guess who they get to sue? Now think about it. $300,000 house, what do you think the monthly finance charge that they pay is? $1,500? So if we say $1,500 times 36 months, $50,000, $60,000, that's about what their attorney's fees will be, about the same. It's about $100,000. Guess who they get to sue? Home Funding Corp? Where's one of your officers? Who works for John? Who's a loan originator? Raise your hand. You guys! You're all on the hook. So let me ask you, you going to write an ability to repay loan? $100,000 for him. John's on the hook for 3 years. Now I'll say this, not a lot of people default in the first 3 years. Most of them default in the 5th year. Not a lot. But if they do this. Now, If they don't default in the first 3 years, they don't lose their right